Hi everyone, I'm Anjchita Nair. I'm co-founder and COO at Culture. It gives me great pleasure to host this third talk in the talk series by Center for Museums, and we have with us Brendan Ciecko. A short introduction about him. Brendan is the founder and CEO of Cuseum, a platform that helps hundreds of leading museums and cultural organizations engage their visitors, members, and patrons. Ciecko has been building technology since the age of 11 and has been recognized by Inc. magazine as being one of America's top entrepreneurs under 30. Recently, Ciecko was inducted to the inaugural Forbes Next 1000 list, named New Innovator by ArtNet, and included in the Blue Loop Top 50 Museum Influencers list. He is also a Webby Award winner and holds 7 patents in the area of mobile technology. Welcome, Brendan. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thank you for having me.
You'd be happy to know we have started our own list of museum influencers in India. And
amazing.
This is the second year running, but yeah. So let's just dive right in. We looked through, your website, and one of the videos on Cuseum website, as it puts it, an engaged visitor is a happy visitor, and a happy visitor is a returning one. With the recent emphasis on total visitor experience and engagement in museum space, what are some of the upcoming innovative technologies that Cuseum is focusing on?
Great question. Well, over here at Cuseum, we spent a lot of time and energy trying to understand the end-to-end aspects of the visitor journey, what happens pre-visit, while they're there, post-visit, and how we can use technology to help museums further understand that, gain new insights, and also play an active role in ensuring that each of those touch points is as engaged and satisfactory as possible. So with regards to some new technologies that we are currently in the works of building, we're spending a lot of time thinking about the role that loyalty plays in the museum experience and how loyalty plays a role in the kind of business cases that are necessary for ensuring that museums thrive now and into the future and make the most of not only appreciating and rewarding their most loyal visitors and members, but do so in a really thoughtful and digitally forward way. So that's something that something that we're really excited about, because at the end of the day, there are the things that you can measure, the things that you can't measure, and we want to help museums understand the measurable aspects, especially when it comes to helping them build out or grow their audience and member base.
Could you give us an example of what these measurable aspects could be?
Oh, absolutely. So in a lot of ways, a visitor or a member straddles both a physical, active, and digital, active or passive way of engaging with the museum. So active examples might be, do they like the museum on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, so on and so forth? Are they opening, engaging with the various newsletters that are being, delivered to them via email marketing tools? Those are just like the baseline examples. And then there are elements about active participation. How frequently are they attending? When they do attend, how long are they spending in the actual venue? Are they spending money at the cafe? Are they spending money at the gift shop? Like understanding a 360-degree view of each individual member or visitor, so that the museum can act accordingly in rewarding them or incentivizing them to come back. And if they aren't participating, how do you incentivize them to increase their engagement with the museum? So those are things that are measurable, again, both digitally as well as physically or in person, that we're really excited to help unlock and help organizations understand.
Right. So while we were reading about Cuseum, we came across a project of yours called Hacking the Heist 2018, in which you used AR to fill empty frames and made museums get their collections digitally as if a crime had never taken place. Could you please elaborate on this project? And can we think along the similar lines to look into the issue of repatriation? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So Just to clarify, Hacking the Heist was a completely experimental project. Here at Cuseum, we spent a lot of time on experimental, projects, exploratory projects when new technology emerges, just to understand them and to be able to provide a perspective to the museum field at large. And so in the case of Hacking the Heist, there's a museum in Boston. We're founded in Boston, Massachusetts, home to some extraordinary cultural organizations and institutions of higher education like Harvard and MIT, all that fun stuff. And in Boston, there's a museum called the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. And over 30 years ago, two men dressed up like Boston police officers broke into the museum, and over the course of about 81 minutes, stole what is worth about $500 million worth of irreplaceable cultural masterpieces. So we're talking about landscape painting by Rembrandt. We're talking about Vermeers. We're talking about significant works of art, highly treasured works of art. I think 13 paintings, for instance. And so this is kind of a looming cloud over Boston, as it was one of the largest art heists in history of a single, property or a single museum, kind of wars excluded. And we've always been inspired by the story. And so in some early R&D work that I was doing, I came back to the office to show my team, and one of my colleagues, Dan, mentioned, it would be really cool if we put the stolen art back in the frames at the Gardner Museum. And I kind of smirked and thought, I'm up for the challenge. I myself was less familiar than I should have been about what the works actually looked like. And then upon talking to people, I found out similarly, either people didn't know that there was a heist, like your average visitor, or if they did, they didn't actually know what the works looked like because there wasn't a way to converge those two views. And so kind of after some nights of tinkering around, we found that we were able to leverage augmented reality to essentially converge the views or superimpose the works in a way that was kind of fooled the eye. So when you hold up the iPad or your mobile phone and go around the room, which has these ghostly empty frames, the frames would be filled with the works that are no longer there. Obviously we all hope for the recovery of the works. It's been a long, long-going FBI case. There's even a Netflix series about this heist. So it's a fascinating kind of true crime story and narrative. And so when we did this, kind of unexpected or unknown to us, the news went crazy. So from start to, a couple of weeks after, there were about 150 plus publications that wrote about it. Beyond the local news, I mean, you're talking about every major news publication across the globe, tech publications, writing about it. And I think in a lot of ways it inspired people to think about the role augmented reality could play in experiencing art, culture, and heritage, but also the role that technology could play in, facilitating conversations around works that were lost, looted, stolen, whether it be through crimes like this or through colonization. And so it just had an unbelievable ripple effect that we never would have expected, not only increasing people's interest in AR and art, kind of another blip in interest around the crime that took place, but also, there were people writing, writing pieces and opinion about how tools like this could play a role in repatriation of art. The Association of African Museums posted something saying that they would love to see this play a role when they not only get their works rightfully returned, but continuing to have works viewable globally through augmented reality. And then someone, even a PhD student or a master's student, wrote a thesis around hacking the Inferno in light of hacking the heist with regards to what happened to the National Museum of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro, the role that AR could play. And again, returning or making visible works that would otherwise be lost or unseen by populations. And so that aside, we're seeing so many conversations take place today, more than ever before, about decolonizing the museum and repatriating and returning restitution of art to countries that had been looted or works taken due to colonization. You see a headline weekly about the Benin bronzes and some really great efforts taking place to return them back to the Kingdom of Benin. And so just really inspired to think about the role that technology might play in helping facilitate or create an increased dialogue about these things. At the end of the day, I hope that museums return works to their rightful nations and rightful people. I think that undoing those wrongs is the moral and right thing to do, the just thing to do. And so I think we're all hopefully on the same page that will happen. It's going to take some time. There are a couple key museums that are standing strong and not participating the way that one would hope. But we're starting to see major institutions, just even last week or the week before, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., as well as the Smithsonian, making epic moves around the returning of the Benin, some Benin bronzes. So that aside, I think that the role technology will play will be in not only digitally documenting these works so that they exist in perpetuity in a form that transcends digital. So that even if, an institution in London or DC or Dresden or Berlin returns a work to a nation, that the arguments that were originally made around conserving the work, protecting the work, documenting the work can be done to the highest degree possible so that the work is visible to everybody globally, 24/7, free of charge, accessible. And so really optimistic about not only the social movements and the justice movements, but also the role that technology can play, whether it be augmented reality or virtual reality in this context.
Yes, absolutely. Did you know that there was a heist in National Museum in India as well, in the 60s, which was inspired by a movie, apparently? Yes, I read it somewhere, but they, I think, stole few coins from few ancient coins, and they hid it right next to the museum till it died down, and then finally they just made it molten gold. So that's how we lost a lot of our artifacts. But yeah. So anyway, moving on, the rise of mobile technology in museums and cultural organizations is no surprise. What are the different mobile technologies that you think could shape the future of museums?
Great question. Well, I think by and large, the way that we socialize, communicate, and see the world has been increasingly through our mobile device. And that trend had been moving in the right direction even before the pandemic. The pandemic certainly accelerated it, where even older members of society that typically would be less tech savvy were now able to scan QR codes at restaurants to open menus and make their vaccine appointments over their mobile phone. So all things considered, aside from the obvious impact of access to everything through your device and social media and streaming and 5G and all that fun stuff, you have a world where these mobile devices are becoming increasingly more powerful, and the things that they'll be able to deliver to us, I think, will be mind-bending in the years to come. And so I think a lot of that plays into the world of immersive technologies like augmented reality, just looking at the mobile phone, not talking about virtual reality, but looking at augmented reality as a way to help wayfind, as a way to kind of paint a layer over the physical world around us. So like being able to hold up your phone anywhere in the world, and have your device overlay interesting tidbits of information or comparisons or context all within the same view in a converged view, I think is really powerful. So I think the day where you won't necessarily get lost in a museum, or the right kind of, there's a right and wrong kind of lost. You want to get intellectually lost and reoriented, but like don't waste your time kind of where's the bathroom or where's this exhibition.
Right.
So having an overlay to help you there, because indoor mapping capabilities are 100% there, and augmented reality is 100% there. I mean, we're clearly heading in that right direction. So again, anyone of any education level being able to hold up their device and see those details and nuances, I think is going to be incredibly powerful. And even the basic information, like I think there's a lot of technology that is present. And I think when the technology feels almost invisible, like literally holding up your device, that's when some magic happens. And so you're seeing some interesting things, like nothing new, like you've been seeing over the last 5-10 years, like, oh, I hold up a device to the 17th century portrait and it comes to life. I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm just talking about information, interpretation, perspective. And if people want to add some edutainment to that, make it a little bit more entertaining and educational, great, like that's encouraged. But I think that's where so much power is going to be unlocked, is when it becomes ubiquitous, when it becomes simple as part of the everyday museum or cultural or tourism experience.
Right. I think that's the main part, right? Making it as accessible as possible with language translations, with annotations. These are things which can easily be added at this moment in time. So,
oh my gosh, yeah. I think especially you hit the nail on the head. Like one thing that's always been a puzzle for me is you're at a museum, a national museum or a major museum. An object label existing in English, I think, is inexcusable. I think that technology unlocks the power for that object label or information to be available in every single language imaginable, both in visual form as well as made audible. And that's something that is so simple and so, well, technologically very advanced, but simple for the visitor. If I walk through and I'm visiting from this country or that country, welcome me in my native tongue, make the experience as accessible and inclusive and welcoming for me. I think that you made a really great point, really powerful point around language.
Yeah. Also, our last talk was about inclusivity and how museums now more than ever need to sort of include people with disabilities, and also see in whatever way they can include more and more people, make the experience more and more seamless for everybody. What kind of technologies do you think are that can be used by museums to make it more inclusive and accessible with respect to disabilities, etc.?
Absolutely. Well, that level of accessibility is a high priority for museums more than ever before, especially here in the United States. And aside from making sure that a museum is handicap accessible, for instance, from a physical perspective, there's more conversations taking place around, ADA compliance from a digital perspective or the equivalents to do so. And so making sure that there's screen reader support for websites and applications, making sure that there's some tactile experiences for those with low or no vision. And, I think, technology is one piece of the puzzle. It's not going to solve every single thing, but it's certainly going to provide an edge when it comes to low cost, ability to serve someone who's low or no vision or has a hearing aid or has some mobility challenges. So aside from that, a lot of conversations even about remote access. And so someone, who might not be able to physically attend the museum in person, being able to remotely experiencing. So you're seeing a lot of museums making kind of the equivalents of Google Street View, kind of carbon copies of the physical world that can be experienced in a remote capacity, whether it be through live stream or things that are a little bit more sophisticated that are like virtual reality, which is a little bit less common. But I think over the next 10 years, if Mark Zuckerberg has his way over the next 10 years, everything will have the metaverse equivalent to it. So I think, those all are aligned with accessibility in that regard. But then from an inclusion perspective, we go back to language and perspective and just making sure that everybody has access to content in a capacity that is comprehensible and accessible and interesting to them. Like, you don't want to feel like a second-class citizen because there's nothing available for you in your language, or if there is, it's kind of a secondary simplified derivative. So those are all things that are easier said than done. I think that a lot of work certainly needs to be done, and technology will be an accelerator or maybe a superpower in getting some of those things done that otherwise wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago.
So can you tell us about your upcoming projects that, that you're working on at the moment to accelerate this particular movement towards technology in museums?
All the time. I mean, this is what we live in. This is what we live and breathe. So as mentioned earlier, we are deepening our understanding and grasps around the member loyalty equation so that we can unlock that power for museums of every shape and size. We have been investing an incredible amount of resources in membership. Membership is super common in the US, becoming more common in Europe, and I imagine will become increasingly more common globally as part of the patron support model or attendance model of museums and cultural organizations, especially as things around state support or government support kind of shift over time. But on our end, we've built digital membership solutions that serve hundreds of museums around the globe. We've built a member portal that serves a growing number of institutions, just to make it more convenient and also deliver members only content. And then on the mobile guide perspective, there's a lot of work that we're doing about distribution of content, whether it be through the mobile guide, whether it be through SMS, whether it be incorporating at-home modes of access using augmented reality. But we're doing a lot of research. We just put out a hybrid report because we're actively looking at the physical and digital kind of bridge that COVID has put on the forefront. And lastly, spending a lot of time thinking about and interviewing and researching how revenue generation, how digital may play a role in new forms of revenue generation. So museums producing unbelievable amounts of digital content and then looking for ways to monetize them. So those are areas, we have our hands in a lot. But those are just a couple areas that we are really optimistic about, and it's a reflection, in many ways holding up a mirror to what the field is asking about or unclear about, unsure about. There hasn't been much leadership in said areas, and so we always like to step up and put our resources and try to help, either pave a path forward or provide new insights, new research components.
Absolutely. We recently had a museum come up, which was completely crowdfunded, and that was something
Cool.
which was not explored by museums earlier. And that's another revenue model, or one of these technology enabled models that one could think about in the museum sector. And speaking of AR, potential for utilizing AR in museum spaces is limitless, be it as an educational tool or a method for engaging visitors. With the endless possibilities, the question becomes, what is the first step that a museum can take towards adoption of AR?
So AR has a lot of different sizes and flavors. We're in this phase where it requires a decent amount of capital and time to realize some form of augmented reality project. I think we're heading in the right direction where there are off-the-shelf tools that make the creation of content for AR easier and easier and easier, therefore less expensive or limited in terms of their costs. So I think the biggest challenge around AR in museums isn't the AR technology. AR technology, fully baked, proven out, is ubiquitous across modern smartphones, and certainly Google, Apple, Facebook, and Snapchat and others have invested and kind of validated that technology. So really, the challenge point, or kind of like the area where there's what to do next, what do we do, is obviously it's not about using augmented reality to solve a problem. It's taking a step back and saying, what's the problem we're looking to solve? And is AR the right tool to do it? Or what works of art or culture could we bring to life in a completely new way, or reach new audiences, or tell a story that we couldn't otherwise play? What's the right technology? And if it's AR, great. And then the next step is, finding the right partner or finding the resources, to do that. And, I have full confidence knowing India is one of the greatest technology economies in the world, that there will be some exciting things to see. But it always starts with, again, what's the story we're trying to tell? What are some works that we can really illuminate or excite people about? And, that in line with the consumer's appetite for these types of experiences, and the decrease in cost to realize them. I think that we're just in the short next couple of years, we'll see more and more interesting use cases.
Are there any use cases or case studies which sort of have excited you, or which you think are something which other museums should also adopt?
Yeah, I mean, we've done some research around AR and VR in the museum. So AR in particularly, we're trying to understand, does this increase the visitors' interest level in a work of art? Does it make it easier to access content? So we released a report, I think, like 4 years ago. Fast Company wrote about it, Computer World wrote about it, and it showed, the overwhelming majority of visitors surveyed, and there were over 100 visitors surveyed, found that it made it easier to access content and more fun to learn. And so I think that, the data's there, both in terms of museum-specific research, but if you look at what's happening in the educational space, and there's studies that show, 2 student groups learning about the pyramids in Egypt, for instance, one reading about it in a book, and others experiencing it through augmented reality, where they can actually, see the pyramids in 3D and kind of get inside them and kind of be transported back in time, whether it be AR or VR, perform better on tests on said, topic, because there's a level of memory and kind of cognition, receptiveness to information that is unlocked for any which reason. I don't have the answers there. That when you're talking about the near term and long-term memory of something as aided through the technology, I think that there's growing amount of research coming out of understanding the implications and impact on education that are interesting to watch. I don't think there have been many other research projects or case studies that I'm aware of. We did collaborate with MIT, a leading neuroscientist, Pawan Sinha, born in India, as a matter of coincidence, on understanding the neurological implications of AR and VR. Basically, I'd always been inspired by or rather inspired and challenged by. So like anytime technology would come up, the topic of technology would come up in museum, topic would always come up around, the implications and, should we have technology in the gallery? Should we not? What's the impact? Does anybody really know? And it just becomes opinion. It just became opinion. And so I was really intrigued by, would there be a way to actually measure and provide empirical evidence around the implications of AR and VR and just technology in general around the art viewing experience? And so looking at, you have the authentic original, or you have a series of authentic original paintings that are supposed to stimulate, the brain in a certain way that you can measure using an EEG, brain monitoring device. And so how does that compare? How does the brain perceive works of art when you're on site looking at the work versus when you're viewing it through the lens of AR versus VR, or 2D reproduction on a tablet or a laptop? And so working with a team of neuroscientists, we were able to do some preliminary research that was honestly very surprising and very compelling nonetheless. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to check out the research, check out the paper, because I think it does open up some interesting doors that kind of reinforce, what I was mentioning about near-term and long-term memory of experiencing something through AR or VR versus just experiencing kind of a flat two-dimensional image. And so that's available online at cuseum.com/neuroscience. And I hope there's more. I hope there's more research of this to come, because I think intellectually we're all curious. We're all curious about the role technology plays in museums, and I think the more we study it, the more we can understand not only its impact on education but also health. There's a big movement, I think, really stemming out of work in parts of Europe as well as Canada around the positive health benefits of going to the museum and viewing art and exploring art. And so I think like the more we understand museum and art's impact on our minds and our bodies and our health, I think that's a positive movement because it further justifies the significance and importance of these cultural organizations to society.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I don't think museums have sort of marketed themselves as points of education or even wellness. And now is the time where we can even support that with data. And that's what's exciting. Moving on, with the advent of blockchain, it is now possible to attach a level of authenticity and ownership to digital objects. How do you think this will impact the museum industry?
Great question. And I know it's one of the big buzzwords and trends, and we've been watching it for quite some time. I mean, I've been familiar with Bitcoin from the time when it was trading at, single-digit dollar. Story for another time, but over 10 years ago, and have been watching that unfold, both through friends that were active participants in the crypto economy, as well as friends in venture capital and friends in fintech, looking at that particular disruptive technology. And so, we've written a lot about the implications of blockchain and how it might play a role. I think that it's still very early days. I'm not super convinced that the blockchain is going to solve every single provenance issue, because if the input of the provenance is already inaccurate or flawed, then you're just putting flawed information on the blockchain. So it's not solving any issues there. I think where crypto might play an increasingly interesting role is around kind of decentralizing certain parts of the museum. So there are some new companies in the field, like Archive, which is a decentralized museum that's created by its members, which enable members to join a decentralized autonomous organization, and then kind of crowdsource voting and participate in the acquisition of culturally significant objects, which I think is interesting. It's disruptive, it's experimental. I don't know if it will succeed or fail, but I very much look forward to what these experimental projects mean and how they impact and influence decisions made by museums in general. But I don't really think the blockchain. I don't think the blockchain is going to be like this year, next year, the following year, going to have explosive impact on the museum world. When you look at the number of museums that accept cryptocurrency, for instance, have a wallet to accept cryptocurrency, whether for donation or attendance, it's a fraction of a percent. And so I think that's something worthy to say there. It's still very early days. And again, when I think of blockchain and attribution, I'm not really convinced that there's anything that's highly, earth-shattering taking place. And then I think lastly, on the topic of blockchain, it'd be hard to talk about blockchain in museums without talking about NFTs. And there's certainly a number of initiatives and companies out in the space collaborating with museums of the likes of the British Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Broad, that are doing really interesting initial works. But that whole market has since collapsed. So it's like really hard to speculate. Museums are not in the speculation business; they're in the forever business, and so it'd be hard to put a ton of chips there. But I think one with any new form of technology should keep an open mind. And again, it's not we need blockchain. It should be, what's a problem that we have not been able to solve that maybe blockchain or crypto might be able to help us with. And so like with any highly speculative technology, it's about keeping your eyes open, keeping your ears open, and surrounding oneself with experts and people that are actively participating. So if I was a museum director, I would make sure that I have access to advisors, trustees, board members that are actively involved in these spaces, so that I at least can see through the buzz. Because it's easy to be tempted by the press. It's easy to be tempted by what a larger, potentially rival museum is doing. And I think having in-house expertise and a willingness and an openness to learn is the number one, takeaway that I have from these, new forms of technology.
Right. So, speaking of technology and what the future holds, what do you think museums will look like in like 5 years, around 2030, or with the advent of metaverse? Do you think things will change? I mean, or is we're just doing more of the same?
I think that there's been a sea change around the collective understanding and perception around technology, front of house, back of house, like all things considered. So you think about the last couple of years, we went from, or like look at the last 5 years. You went from 5 years ago, museum directors being completely opposed to certain things via social media and around technology, to museum directors now use their phones. They're active on Instagram. They're active on social media. Of course, their museums are, but there's always like a lagging, a slower to adopt kind of nature of any highly, academic or curatorial field. So you see that in academia, you see that in kind of the scholarly, anything that has like a scholarly element to it isn't going to be jumping, to the forefront of utilizing these new technologies, and might be a little hesitant and traditional and formal around their approach. And so there's, museums, like, I don't know, read any children's book on museum. There's a little bit of like formalist nature. Like there's a level of like formality to what the museum is, the prestige to what the museum is. And that, I think, in many ways has held back the culture of museum when it comes to anything, but especially technology, being one of those things, or adopting to how millennials and Gen Zs communicate, see the world, socialize, participate in social activity, and just even the social dynamic of museum at large. And so I think that has loosened up quite considerably over the last 5 years. And then the last 2 years, you're talking about, again, 5 years ago, curators saying, I don't really, like, I've heard this from curators, I don't believe that the best way to experience a work of art is over social media. And then you having these incredible success stories of how Instagram and TikTok are engaging audience that otherwise would never see something or care about it or value it. And then curators now being on social media and participating in it because maybe they see that the value it has in their own social circle or their families, their children, or just like the power is too undeniable. So that like shift is here. And then, talking about behind the scenes, you're talking about a world where digital literacy plays a huge role in making sure that museums have the capacity and capability internally, whether you are in curatorial or education or frontline staff or security or anything, finance, that technology is going to unlock new potentials. And so I think that the thing that is probably going to be most transformative is not going to be the metaverse in the next 5 years. It's going to be anything aided by artificial intelligence. And so we're already starting to see the impact of AI on finance, the impact on AI on business intelligence, the impact of AI on predicting things, the impact of AI on translating text into endless amounts of language, synthesizing text into audio, doing things that are just kind of like unfathomable years ago. So I would say 5 years from now, I could see that having a really interesting impact on museum practice, but I think it's not going to be incredibly visible to the end participant. It's going to make life easier. It's going to make things more streamlined, but it's not going to, have an incredible change to how the museum, visitor visit might look around, the things that I mentioned of simply being able to hold up your phone to anything and have it tell you more. That's something that I hope for, because I think it unlocks, educational value and ease for every, visitor, if that's what they choose. Like, it's all, what the consumer chooses. So I think those are some things that we'll see. I don't, again, like if someone, and I send me a note in 5 years, I don't, I think I'll be right about a couple things, wrong about a couple. I don't think that there's going to be a 5 year from now, like metaverse explosion. We're already seeing, like, if you read TechCrunch or Business Insider or Forbes, like there's a lot of clashing around. Like, I don't know if, like, Mark Zuckerberg, I think, got VR and the metaverse wrong, or it's too early. Like, it's, sometimes if you're too early, you're wrong. Even if, 20 years from now, he might be right. Timing is really meaningful. So 5 years from now, I mean, yeah, we'll see more technology in the gallery. I think technology will play a bigger role in museum practice behind the scenes. And I think we'll make the things that are clunky and inefficient in the museum, which hold them back, I think it will add some efficiency and ease. And I think we'll start to see a more digitally comfortable, digitally native, and digitally forward, kind of museum culture. So those are things. It takes time. Like, it takes a lot of time. My answer to this is probably super different than if someone were to ask me about, like, professional sports, of which I am not an expert. It's very different, like very different pace of change. Right. Also, the difference between being highly commercial and for-profit versus being, having different mission involved. And then the only other thing I'll mention is like we're all really eager to see what the impact of the $70 million investment that MoMA is making towards digital. So that was in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago. I have a couple ideas about that, and I think the museum sector at large, looking at MoMA, kind of an undisputed champ of contemporary and modern art and a leading figure, saying, rather than keeping these works of art or replacing them with other works of art, we are going to sell these works of art from a collection from which they were lent, in the name of investing significantly in our digital access, our digital reach. And so I think that will be incredibly interesting to watch what they learn from that. That's a lot of money. Whether you're the MoMA or any, that's a lot of money. So if they can do that in a bold yet sustainable way, I think that the field will have a lot to learn from that, and we'll be able to make more educated decisions 5 years from now about what the perfect balance looks like. So just wanted to footnote that because it's timely.
We'll open up the floor for questions. If anyone has any, please put them in the chat. Yes, we have one. Someone asked, in future, do you think that digital technologies can play a role in leveraging collections among museums, and in what ways?
Okay. In the future, do you think that digital technologies can play a role in leveraging collections among museums, and in what way? So I think that the answer is yes. And when we're looking at collections, in particular, I think one of the untapped things around collections, if you're referring to a collection that is lendable amongst multiple museums, it would be the dynamic of traveling exhibitions being extraordinarily augmented due to, an immersive experience, whether it be AR or VR, of things that otherwise could not physically move. So I'll give you an example. There are traveling exhibitions from the British Museum of Greek and Roman, artifacts. So there's like a small select group of maybe like 20 objects that move from museum to museum to museum. We're talking about traveling exhibitions. And then there are things from the British Museum which are just never going to move, both in terms of how fragile they are, or how fragile the size of them, the economics of it might also not make sense, or they might not even fit in the host organization. So I think being able to augment a traveling exhibition using, said technology, where there might be just a portion of something on display, but the full 3D documented, experience brings you back to ancient Greece, I think is something that would elevate an experience for someone who's just literally seeing part of a pillar, but doesn't know that that part of the pillar is part of the a grand temple in Athens,
right?
The Parthenon.
So we have another question. They ask, can you please throw some light on the aspect of storytelling and museums with reference to digital engagement?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been talking a fair bit about that early on, especially around hacking the heist. There's some great storytellers. There's an unbelievable amount of storytellers, and even the topic and positioning around storytelling, I think really, from my mind, where I've been working in the museum space for about 7 years, I'd say a couple years in, the shift from conversation around technology to technology really shifted to storytelling as the anchor from it, both in terms of being relevant to more and more audience members, connecting with audience members, and telling something or sharing something beyond just like the typical dry didactics. So I think the difference between fact and story are pretty clear, where the didactic information about a work of art, a painting, an artifact why is that interesting or important to anybody other than a scholar? Like one could make that argument. So I think it's really the infusion of the story, of tying it back to, tying it back to some interesting narrative of the people that surrounded it, or the moment in time, or how it's relevant to us today, is where rubber hits the road. And so, technology plays a role in that by helping people envision something that might be hard to envision otherwise, kind of bring that text to life, or through interview, voices, or juxtaposition. So I think hearing a story or reading a story about a work of art, and then being brought into a digital recreation, or seeing images that are pulled up through a digital form that don't disrupt the viewing experience, like very much separate the two, or one would not be possible to recreate for the viewer, is incredibly interesting and important, and I think brings more voices to the table. Because again, I think that there's needs to be a storytelling element to everybody, and I think where technology could also help is a story being told on an object label, if they are making that step, or on a panel, is very different than being able to tell multiple stories. And with technology, allowing the visitor to pick and choose, or to serve them an array of stories, whether those be community voices of how someone feels and reacts to a work with their own story, is something that I think I'd love to see more of. There's already been great strides in the museum field to do that, and technology just allows there to be endless real estate beyond what it would be possible on the physical walls.
Right. In fact, I think this communication of the story of the museum itself has become a point of interest for a lot of people, and a way to connect with audiences. Like I think recently I came across Twitch channels by museums where they show their behind the scene action, and that is one way where they sort of engage with audiences, which could not have thought people would actually be interested in watching museums set up exhibitions. So there are
behind the scenes, yeah.
Behind the scenes, yeah. So it's actually very interesting that the tools, how they are sort of coming to museum sector in ways which hadn't been envisioned before.
Yeah, I mean, the making of anything. Like, why do people watch the making of something about a movie or a Netflix show, or making of a music video or a song, or anything for that matter? I think there's just personal interest of what are the ingredients that go into this. And that's another story. It might not be the most interesting story to everybody outside of us in the museum field, but yeah, I mean, anything you can do to pique people's interest, it's a good move.
Yeah. I think the third question is something which we've already sort of touched upon. What would be the technology look? What would technology look like for the disabled population in times to come? So I think we already spoke about that a little, but in case you want to sort of get into that some more.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't have much more to add to what I mentioned early about that. I will say that there are people in the field that I would consider to be experts, like Sina Bahram of Prime Access in the US. I mean, definitely a thought leader around technology for populations of low and no vision, and hearing, and other types of challenges, or things of that nature. So I feel like we've spoken a good deal on the topic, and there are others that I would recommend you look into who are brilliant and are leading the way forward around accessibility in museums, and how technology plays a role.
And maybe we can end with this question, but you've been talking about membership and loyalty programs and how technology enables them. What about small organizations or museums? What are the small steps that they can take without much capital, which helps them build a community or membership program?
Yeah, I mean, if I was a small museum, I would, keep my eyes open to what the field is doing, what appears to be working really well for the highest number of museums, and trying to find my way to take iterative, low risk steps to experiment and see what works for me and my community. I think the reality is to find what makes you unique, what makes you different from all of your peers, and putting a little bit of time and effort into thinking about how can I bring that message to a broader audience, or deepen the bond with the existing audience that I have today. So for small museums, I understand, I hear you, like resources are sparse. You have one person in one department who's doing the work of three departments. You probably don't have access to the same budgets as mid-size and larger institutions. I mean, you don't. We know that, and we are sympathetic to that reality. So I think looking for free or easy to use tools, finding the things that make you unique, and trying to marry the two, and test them out and see what works and see what doesn't. But it's about that willingness to take the first step and an experiment that I think is really valuable.
Right. Interestingly, there are a few museums which have come up only in the digital space in India, and there is no physical sort of manifestation of the same collection. And that is something that we've not seen before. I don't know if you've also come across them. Like, for example, there was a partition museum where oral history interviews of people, digital oral history interviews have been showcased, but there's no actual museum where you can go and see these interviews or meet people, or any exhibits. So
it's very interesting to think of the cataloging of human creation and human stories, just like the example you gave. And then with regards to the war in Ukraine right now, there's a museum called, I believe, Meta Museum, and it's completely digital museum, a collection of artworks and creations that tell the story, and also are tied to NFT and fundraising. But there's no physical museum, to tell these triumphant stories and to connect with people. And I think that idea of collecting, categorizing, disseminating information in interesting ways is inherently, human. And if we're able to do something without the physical space, I think we've proven throughout the pandemic, like communities, physical space matters. Trust me, offices matter, office culture, physical culture, cafe culture, like you name it. It is incredibly important to our human existence and joy and progress. But we've also shown that a community can exist in a solely virtual capacity and still have great benefit to the world. So I would argue that the same applies to a virtual museum or a collection of voices and stories and narratives like you mentioned.
So we will sort of keep a watch on what's happening, and hopefully we'll connect again and see if what things that you've talked about, do they come true, or what new things come up. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope our audience had a good time.
Thank you. I really appreciate the dialogue today. I'm really excited about your work and kind of the evolution of museums in India. I hope to firsthand visit and experience. And if anyone has any questions or comments or ideas, I'm going to pop my email address in the chat, and feel free to send me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people that share interesting passions and ideas, especially around the globe, because we are a global community, and we're connected more than ever before. And so I appreciate everybody's work in the space, your passion for evolving and advancing the museum. And until next time, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.